Do the Ducks have a scholarship numbers problem right now? Yeah, technically. I don't expect it to be an issue, though. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day if you're watching on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with our beloved Ducks, which is why, if you haven't already, please continue to like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, helping you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So I've gotten a number of questions from many of you. And by the way, for those of you watching on YouTube, this logo right here, Southern Utah University, school that I do some play-by-play for in case you were wondering. But a number of you have asked a question, and I think very fairly, because I've wondered about it a bit myself. Oregon is currently over the scholarship limit. Brandon Dorlus is coming back. They added a transfer linebacker from Arizona State, like I kind of thought they would. We'll toot my own horn just like a little bit there, but not too much because that's, a conversation in depth for another day. But right now, they are over the limit. You are allowed 85 scholarship players on a football roster. Oregon is sitting at like 92, 93, and they're still expected to add more, one of whom I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in the show. But here's how I see the scholarship situation right now. First of all, as this podcast drops, school is back in session for everybody everywhere. So I think it was reasonable to assume, and I still expect, that there was going to be, and I think is going to be, kind of another quote-unquote wave of guys to leave the program after the bowl game because maybe they weren't sure about their playing time, they weren't sure about their decisions, they wanted to weigh all their options, maybe play one last game with their teammates before they, hit the road and tried to find a home elsewhere. I think there are a number of reasons why you'd wait till after the bowl game, but school hasn't been in session, so all of the clerical work that goes into transferring away from a football team maybe hasn't been quite as highly operational. I think that could be part of it. I think guys waiting to make their decisions could be a part of it. Some guys maybe didn't know, that they wanted to transfer until now. Maybe they've seen other players who have come into the program and decided they want to leave. But here's my biggest takeaway with that. And again, this question has come from many of you out there. Do you think that Dan Lanning and this staff are unaware that they are currently over the scholarship limit? My guess is no, they are not. We are all aware of it, and we have the internet to try and poke and prod and, peek, try and find information, right? They have all that information. So I'm pretty darn certain, right? Like one of you, I forget who it was, might have been my guy Peyton, but don't remember, asked the question like, well, what happens if Oregon doesn't get under the 85 scholarship limit? There is an entire coaching staff at work here. An entire staff. There's Dan Lanning, there are coordinators, there are position coaches, there are all these people. But among those people, and it's a little bit more of a modern thing in college football, but is becoming increasingly common, are directors of player personnel or chiefs of staff. People with those sorts of titles, right? Don Johnson is our director of player personnel. Marshall Malkow is our chief of staff. Those guys exist solely for roster management. It is their full-time position. And glad Coach Johnson has been recovering well for the last couple of months. But that has been what they have been working on because that's what they do. It is their job. It's not exclusively Lanning's job, though he is certainly a part of those conversations, but it is exclusively their job to help in recruiting, to help in roster management, player analysis, but also player personnel people, chiefs of staff, Those sorts of titles are in place for specifically this reason. So yes, as I record this episode, and probably as you listen to it, Oregon is over the scholarship limit. I do not know the exact date where they have to get down to 85, but the transfer portal window is open for 9 more days. It closes on January the 18th. So the possibility that more players will go into the portal, I could sit here and speculate about who those might be. There are a lot of different ways you could go. There's a lot of offensive and defensive linemen who, really haven't played a lot, or were maybe not expected to be big time players to begin with. A couple slot receivers, a couple corner. There are a lot of different guys who could end up leaving at one point in time. And from our perspective as people who watch and consume Oregon football, we wouldn't notice a tremendous amount. But between now and then, I expect more guys to enter the portal, but these conversations are ongoing, right? When guys enter the portal, they don't just put their names in there. They're usually going to talk to their coaching staff about it. They're going to talk to their position coach. They're going to talk to the head coach. They might talk to another coach who they've got a good rapport with. It's very rarely, from what I have understood, having been around a college football program, this one, that guys just go into the portal and a coach is caught way off guard, or a staff is caught way off guard. That doesn't happen very often. So moves still need to take place for Oregon to get under that limit, yes. But there are people who are working on this full time. They are aware of it. I expect more moves to take place. And they know that the rule has to be adhered to. So I don't know what the potential penalty would be, and I don't really care because I don't expect that they're going to end up over the limit because they have such a huge team. It's a big team of people, right? When you're talking about coaches, you typically mention the head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, maybe a stud position coach or two. But there are a lot more people behind the scenes that are going to help them get through this sort of stuff and figure it out. Yes, it means more players are probably going to enter the transfer portal, and I think that is okay because Lanning is really doing a huge overhaul of this roster here, which is not something a lot of teams would say after a 10-win season. Like, Washington is not going to overhaul their roster. Oregon State, not going to overhaul. USC, maybe on defense, sure, but they're just going to have some changes here and there. Oregon is undergoing a huge, huge shift with the transfers they're bringing in, the recruiting class they're bringing in. They're over 30 new players. And then think about the number of guys from last year's recruiting cycle who you'd say, yeah, that was a Dan Lanning recruit. Josh Connerly, for instance, or was recruited by someone on this staff, plus the transfers they brought in. Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington. You got the 2 offensive tackle transfers who are coming in this year. Sam Taimani, Casey Rogers, right? It is going to be a roster comprised well over 50% of quote-unquote Lanning's guys, or players that this staff have recruited from the high school ranks or from the prep ranks. But if you're concerned about them getting under the 85 number, I really wouldn't be. I don't think that that's going to be a concern here. They're well aware of it. A lot of different things they can do, and I'm sure they're expecting more guys to be in the portal. I think they could still add players from the portal. One in particular, who I will tell you about after I tell you about my friends at LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. It's not, for instance, how a coaching staff is addressing the transfer portal, but if it were the vehicle they were going to use, it would be an effective one. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. One theoretical opening that Oregon football could post on LinkedIn Jobs would be wanted, high-level pass rusher. And the Ducks potentially have one in their sights here. Now, Brandon Dorlus is coming back. get to that a little bit later in the week. But I wanted to get to Jordan Burch because one or two of you asked me a question about him, very fairly, by the way, because this is an intriguing body type. And I'm going to emphasize it's an intriguing body type. Obviously, he's a person, he's a kid, he's a football player. I get all that sort of stuff. But the reason that this is a name you should have on your radar if you're an Oregon fan is Jordan Burch was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, and he was recruited by a variety of programs, including Georgia, where one Dan Lanning was the defensive coordinator and primary recruiter as he tried to lure him to the Bulldogs. He ended up choosing the Gamecocks of South Carolina, where he's played for the last couple of seasons. But he came out as the number 8 player in the country, the number 2 overall defensive tackle, and the caliber of programs that were going after him were pretty high, which just as a general rule, quick aside here before I get into him, when you're talking about, we flipped this 4-star, we flipped that 3-star, we got this guy, we lose that guy, who you are going against in a given recruiting battle can tell you a lot about this 4-star versus that 4-star. Because sometimes you look at recruits and you say, hey, we got a 4-star commit. Nice. Well, who are you going up against? If the choices were Oregon, Nevada, Fresno State, Washington State, and UCLA, there is a chance, though not a certainty, that maybe isn't as highly coveted of a recruit as a battle that was won, say, for instance, between Ohio State, USC, and Georgia, Mateo Uiagalelei, right? But just as a quick aside that popped in my head, I thought I'd share it. But great example, by the way, Jalil Florence came down to Oregon and USC, and he ended up choosing Oregon. And I think that's a very good thing because I'm very high on Jalil Florence. If he can become a better tackler, I think his coverage skills and physical traits are excellent. But speaking of physical traits, this guy Jordan Burch has got him. I mean, a big part of how you get a 5-star rating at any position, you got to have the physical traits first and foremost. Well, he's got those. He's got those. That's why he was the number 2 defensive tackle coming out of the class of 2020. He's the highest rated player that South Carolina signed since Jadeveon Clowney back in, I think that was 2011. A guy Oregon, I think, was also in on at the time, but he is 6'5", 275 pounds. He's a big dude. And he's kind of, like Brandon Dorlus actually, a bit of a hybrid body type. He was listed as a defensive tackle coming out of college, but he played defensive end at South Carolina. He can play defensive tackle. He can line up inside and outside, much like Brandon Dorlus. Now, in his 2 years at South Carolina, he's got 3 years of eligibility left, so this is not the sort of transfer that would be like a one and done. This is a sort of transfer that you would add and could become a mainstay in your defense for a few years. And it's certainly that sort of SEC body type that Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy are looking for. But some context here. Is this a worthy player to go after for the Ducks? Yes. They don't make 6'5", 275 with his sort of explosiveness very often. But. In 2 years at South Carolina, he has been, by the standards he was recruited at, underwhelming. In 2022, he had 60 tackles, which is a pretty good number. That's not bad, right? That's like 5 or so per game, which for a defensive lineman, solid production. 7.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Now, for what it's worth, 3.5 sacks would have been second on the Ducks this year, which is not saying a lot, but it is saying something. DJ Johnson had 6 to lead the way. 7.5 tackles for loss would have been third, behind, again, DJ Johnson and Brandon Dorlus. Now, when you see a guy, he always gets, promoted on Twitter as former 5-star recruit, blah, 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 whichever guy, because he's not the first, former 5-star to transfer, right? DJU, former 5-star quarterback, has some elite traits. Did he look like a true 5-star at Clemson? Not all the time, sometimes here and there and such, but I haven't seen what he grades in the transfer portal, but that's besides the point. Great example of this, by the way. Former 5-star linebacker Justin Flo transfers to Arizona. Does anyone think that's going to completely reshape Arizona's defense? He will probably be a starter there. He could still be a solid player there. But is he going to match the potential that he showed and the hype that he got when he came out of high school? The answer to that question is usually no. Now, it can vary position by position. Maybe he just needs a change of scenery. Maybe he needs a different scheme. Maybe he needs a different conference. I don't know. It worked out for Bo Nix. He was a 5-star recruit. He graded as a 3-star transfer. Boy, he played pretty darn close to a 5-star caliber player in 2022, and thankfully we get him back for this upcoming season as well, which is now less than 8 months away, and I can't wait. Really, I can't wait. I want football. Oregon basketball picked up a nice win the other day. The women unfortunately lost to Arizona, but anyway, besides the point. I'm not saying Oregon should not go after this guy. What I am saying is your expectations, if Oregon does go after him, and it appears they've got at least a solid chance to do so, should be realistic here. Because, yes, he has a physical body type that may be able to be more productive in the Pac-12 than it was in the SEC. But part of the reason he's transferring away from South Carolina is not because they have not been good. I mean, they were solid last year, and they got better this year. They improved. So when you look at the team that he left, it's not like it was a disaster. They were an improving team. I believe I think they were a solid 8-win team. They had some big wins late in the year, but his production was not matching the hype that he had, and I think that was frustrating fans a little bit. I think he was probably frustrated as well. That's speculative on my part, but fairly, I would think. And so now he's going to leave. And if Oregon gets him, he'd probably slide in and be a starter somewhere. He'd probably start at defensive end for DJ Johnson just based on his size, athleticism, and experience alone. But when people hear, oh, he was a former 5-star recruit, he's usually in the portal as well for a reason, right? Is South Carolina a top-tier program? No. But they had Jadeveon Clowney, and he lived up to the billing over there, and he didn't leave the program because things were going well. They were winning games, and he was producing at a high level. Clemson was winning games, but DJU was not producing at a high level. So he transfers and goes to the Pac-12. So I think Oregon should go after him. I think there's an absolute needed edge. I think portal-wise, it's probably the biggest need at this point in time. Maybe safety. Still don't know what Steve Stevens and Jamal Hill are going to do. They have not announced. Neither is Casey Rogers. Those are important names to watch because of how much they played this year. Bennett Williams' brother, Evan, also on the radar, would certainly be a contender for major playing time in the defensive backfield, coming over from Fresno State, worthy of discussion at another time in full. But I think this is a guy Oregon should be interested in. And I think he has the potential, because going from the SEC to the Pac-12, it's going to be easier if you're a defensive lineman. You're not going up against as many high-caliber college or NFL offensive linemen as you would in the SEC. But if Oregon gets him, I just don't expect him to come be a dominant player. He could come be a good player, but I don't expect him to be top 10 player coming out of his recruiting class and all that sort of stuff and the hype that he had. So just wanted to add a little bit of context there. Again, I would take him. He'd probably play. I would not expect him to dominate. I'd expect him to be good because anytime you add a transfer, right? Talked about a general rule with recruiting earlier for high school kids. If you add a transfer, most of the time, I expect him to play a lot. Because why else are you taking up a scholarship slot and preventing the potential growth of a young guy to, emerge on the scene for the Ducks in terms of playing time if you're adding someone who you think can fill that void right away? So, Jordan Burch, South Carolina defensive lineman, big 6'5", 275, definitely a name to follow. Mailbag question to round out today's episode, and a doozy as it pertains to the defensive side of the ball. Your bets can be a doozy too if you go to Bet Online, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. We've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. Head to the website today, or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. Alrighty, It's really easy to ask a question here on the show. YouTube comments, Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. People who have been with me for a while, thank you so much for doing that. You know by now how to reach me. My man Alex, who reached me via my personal phone number, seeing as that we have been pals for, long time. I lost count at this point, but people like that can ask me a question too. And he asked a good one. With the game being as pass happy as it is, you said that linebackers are arguably the least important defensive position. Yes, I did. I do stand by that. How much weight do you put on the quarterback of the defense element that an elite linebacker brings to the table, even though they may not be able to cover as well as one would like compared to a lockdown corner or a center fielder like safety? So he brings up a great point here, because when you're looking at building a great defense, and if you look at the last great defense Oregon had, 2019, they were really good. They were strong in the secondary. They were strong on the defensive line. Their linebackers, they were solid players, but they were nothing special. Now, typically, over the course of time of football, the middle linebacker has been, as he points out, the quarterback of the defense, right? He's been kind of the play caller, the signal caller, the guy who gets everybody, situated, make sure their assignments are clear. I think safeties have taken a bigger role on that front, on the back end of a defense, right? Making sure assignments are correct. So typically, I think you have to have two guys like this on your defense, right? I think you need to have a linebacker who can do it, right? Get your defense in the right checks, make sure assignments are correct, and have that sort of experience. And then also you need to have a safety, because he's kind of seeing the whole field, right? And he can, most easily communicate with someone on this side, a corner, a safety, linebacker, and everybody in between. I think there's value in having someone like a Noah Sewell who, has just played a lot of football, has experience. I think that's why Oregon added a transfer linebacker in the portal in addition to Justin Jacobs. Now they have this guy from Arizona State because they're looking for experience at that position, right? And younger guys like Keith Brown, Devin Jackson, Harrison Taggart maybe aren't quite as ready to step in and fill that role. I am curious what happens with Jeffrey Bossa going forward, but I think it matters. I think it helps, but do I think it's quintessential to your defense to have that? Not really, no, because you should be able to communicate a play call without someone who's a 2 or 3 year starter being there, right? It helps and maybe works out in some key moments potentially, and helps with some little details. But I think if you're going to build a defense, it doesn't matter enough to me to place a greater priority on finding an elite middle linebacker compared to an elite pass rusher and a great cover corner and a safety, right? Like those would be my priorities. I think if you're building a defense, you got to have a great pass rusher first. You got to have an elite man-to-man corner second. You got to have a ball hawking safety third. Probably a good middle linebacker fourth. Probably fourth, maybe interior defensive lineman to help stuff the run, but linebackers are big with that as well. So I think it's probably the fourth most important position on the field. And, I put some weight on the quarterback of the defense component, but, football is much more about instincts on the defensive side of the ball than actually, calling plays, right? Like play calling matters. We saw that this year with Tosh Lupoy on third down, struggled mightily, and hopefully that's something that the Ducks can improve upon next year, because that's probably one of the biggest keys for the defense making a leap forward is getting off the field on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12. Got to be able to get off the field, force a punt, get the ball back to your offense there. But I wouldn't say it doesn't matter. I wouldn't say it's too important though. Like it's not the difference between being average and being great is having a great middle linebacker who's a huge vocal leader there. At the end of the day, you have to have playmakers in the right spots who have great instincts and are also well coached, and they get the right play calls in from the sideline. Love the question though. Keep them coming as always. YouTube, Twitter, I will always answer, even if it gets kind of lost in the shuffle from times. I promise I will always get to it because I appreciate all of you. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.